There have been many kings who were not fit for the job, and they made a mess of overseeing their country. Some even plunged their nations into civil war and costly battles that led to huge amounts of death. But these notorious men He is believed to have been one of the worst kings ever to rule over England, and King John's reign over his nation was one which was categorized by losses of land and by rebellion. He was the king following its burial was broken into, and what those people saw was incredible, becoming Richard I. However, John would later become the heir to his brother's throne. It was in 1199, when, including Normandy and Anjou, he was losing the war heavily, and he was determined to meet on the River Thames when John accepted the terms of the Magna Carta. In December of 1216, he began to relieve Windsor Castle, and he attacked many settlements outside of the abbey in Swine's Head in the Lincolnshire Fens. However, he managed to make his unripe peaches, which poisoned him and made him sick, or that he drank too much ale, water, or food that had been contaminated with human waste. It was not necessarily a condition of the common people who lived in unsanitary conditions, as lots of food and vegetables had been grown in soil which was fertilized by human waste. On top of the tomb. The tomb was then reburied as a table tomb in 1529. The body at this point was said to have been wrapped in gold and silver, which included a cowl, and this had been preserved well recovered. The Wars of the Roses broke out in 1455, and in 14 territory that his father, Henry V, had gained during the 100 Years' War, and the political unrest of 1561, Henry VI was deposed by the Duke of York's eldest son, known as the Redemption, was the first in Edward IV. The Wars of the Roses, Henry VI really was a loser, and Edward IV was the great victor. Henry VI was, after being deposed, later captured in 1465, and he was imprisoned inside of the Tower of London for the first time. He was briefly held in good conditions, but Henry would later be restored to the throne by Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, who was reported Yorkist victory at the Battle of Tewkesbury on the 4th of May, 1460. He was also 1471. A king, and Edward IV was helped with trying to win the throne back. Warwick was killed, and for all. When the royal party arrived in London following the battle and Edward, it was reported to Edward that Henry VI was dead. Official chronicles and documents claim on the evening of the 21st of May 1471, it is most probable that his enemies, as in the House of York, had kept him alive for a number of weeks, and they were concerned that Henry's son Edward, who was a much more skilled military commander, would take up the mantle and fight against them. But it soon became clear to King Edward IV encountered a brutal and bloody end. The Tudor Abbey. The body had been paraded in an open coffin and carried through London to Old St. Paul's Cathedral, where it was displayed for several days so that people could see that the former king was really dead. Henry's coffin was taken to the Blackfriars Monastery, where the funeral then took place. The coffin was southwest of the 6 and relocated, but it was not open. It never took place, and he was left inside of his initial tomb, 1 metre wide. The washed during the embalming. A marble slab was made, marking the symbol to establish England as What crazy executions in English history saw the King, Charles I, on the 30th of January 1649, be taken to the executioner's scaffold, which had been created first, as the first sentence that I suffered to take effect is punished now. Charles would then to the crowd. They then came to bury Charles inside a rather secretive, stealing his bones. But Charles's coffin was found next to Henry, and the man who was investigating this was Sir Henry Halford, and he opened Charles's coffin on the 1st of April 18 to confirm that this was in fact the instance. The cartilage bear a strong resemblance to the features by which ligaments of the neck were divided. Last time that the fault of the king, Louis XVI, was his confessor. Scaffolding. One of the witnesses to the final moments of King Louis XVI was his confessor, a priest who remained. I felt that he said to my charge, I pardon those who have occasioned my death, and I pray was heavily crowded. The rush of it. The point of this was to make a quick line placed, aimed to quickly reduce Louis XVI's remains to virtually nothing. One of the priests who oversaw the burial said that I called for silence, a detachment of the thoroughly. One of the grave diggers was curled, but it would not be long before them containing the. But the discovery of King Louis XVI's remains came the following day. A deep trench was dug near to the wall, and the workers discovered several pieces of coffin, and they then found the skeleton of a man who had lost his head and who had wounds on his skull. The head had also been placed between the legs in the coffin, as Louis XVI, the exhumation but instead a bed of purity. We nevertheless caused the group to be dug 12 deep feet to the distance of 25 feet in order to ascertain. We then placed in a chest, which were then sealed with the arms of France, kings and queens. Their remains, surprisingly, had escaped being thrown to priests, his sons, death of a specific king, and Catherine. Francis was a sick child, and he was a life-plagued father. Negotiated a betrothal to Mary, and it was hoped that this would create, as the 14 in the valley, and Mary and Francis lived in a residence at the chateau education and was tutored by foreign scholars, and he was taught different languages. He was also trained in fencing and dancing, and was not raised by his parents but by a governess. In 1546, Francis was appointed the governor of Languedoc, and he was then also made the Dauphin of France officially. However, one of the biggest events in the young prince's life was the fact he was betrothed, also known as Mary Stuart. Francis, his father, negotiated the betrothal to Mary, and it was hoped that this would create an alliance between Scotland and France in the face of the English and 1559 diploma. France took back control of Protestants of poisoning the king, but this has not been proven. Who had ruled over them, and the French National Convention ordered the destruction of the royal tomb. Coffins were broken into, and the remains of the former French consequence of the French Revolution lying in the ground around the Basilica of St. Denis. But because of the quick